Greetings, YouTube community. This is Peter Piper, the True Light speaking. And today I have a very special occasion. It's the 5-year anniversary of my mother's passing at the hour of 5:15 p.m. Presently, it's about 5:13. And I have the key ready for winding the clock. This is the first time it's been started since my mom's passing. As I explained in the previous video, my brother let the clock run down when my mom entered hospice about 2 weeks before she passed. So it most likely stopped long before she passed. A couple of words about the clock. It's a German-made clock, and there's a stamp on the inside. It chimes the chimes of Big Ben, and well, it's coming up on 5:14 right now, and I think that I will start the wind. So bear with me. I don't even know if it'll start, but I'm not sure which mechanism I'm supposed to start with. There are 3 springs apparently. So I'll start the first one. This is where it stopped at about 10:40 a.m. or p.m. perhaps. These springs feel pretty tight actually. This one is the loosest. I hope it runs. I don't want to go too tight on these. It is a delicate instrument. So let's see what happens. Well, how about that? So that's the quarter of the hour chime. And I'm going to go to the 10 o'clock hour chime and show you the mechanism in the back of the clock. She's running, folks. And it's past 5:15, so that's appropriate. Now, as far as the make of the clock, I may have made a mistake previously when I made my video and mentioned that it was a Seth Thomas clock. I don't know where I got that idea from, but there's the only indication I have of the make is this stamp on the movement and some kind of insignia there. Let it come into focus. Looks like there's the number 66 above a clock symbol, and Germany is stamped under that, and perhaps that's the serial number 340 TAC 020. And the letters under that are, if I can get it to focus there, I think it's H-A-I-Q or O. Let me look at it myself. Well, I would need my glasses for that. But if that's of any significance, I'm sure that you clock experts there, Dale, Piper, John, if you have any information or knowledge, which wouldn't surprise me, that would be appreciated. So this clock is going to go in my living room. I will set the time. I will set the time on it to read the correct time. It's not really 10 o'clock, but that's the time at which it stopped. So I'll talk a little bit about my mom. My mom was born in Riga, Latvia in 1924. Here's a picture of, on my refrigerator, that's my mom, and that's yours truly, with a naughty look on my face. Here's a picture of her shortly before she passed away. I think she's about 90 or 91 here. And we'll go into the living room. Turn the light on a little bit so that we have some. Yes, this is my living room. You guys haven't seen this. I can't smoke in here, unfortunately. But I'd love to just sit in that armchair with a nice large pipe and a book. And that would get me excommunicated from the family, I believe. At any rate, here's my mom and me on the day I was married. We took a picture together. This was in 2000. Here's a earlier picture of her. And take some more pictures here. This is my mom and my dad. My dad was a chief petty officer in the Navy. He was an aviation electronics technician chief. And my mom is 39 years old here. And this is where I'm going to put the clock for an hour. This is the spot that my wife chose. I'll back up a little bit. It's going to go right in that spot there between those two vases. It's a very nice couch and some pictures. So that's about it for now. I should continue with the story about my mom, though. After being born in 1924, shortly after that, her father passed away at a very early age. He was in his 20s. And her life was not without a great deal of hardship. And I would say that that made for a very strong person. It's the trials and tribulations in our life that make us strong. Her sister died in a swimming accident when she was a teenager. And of course, World War II broke out, and Latvia was constantly being occupied back and forth both by Nazi Germany and by the USSR. The USSR finally acquired it at the end of World War II. But in the meantime, the Nazis occupied it, and the Russians drove them out. However, most of the young men in Latvia were in the German army called the Latvian Legion. When things got to the point where it was hopeless, my mom and her family, namely her husband at the time, her first husband, and my grandmother, her mother, and her husband, and my grandmother at the time was about 42, I'm going to guess, and she was pregnant with my uncle. And my sister was born and was an infant. Both my uncle and sister were born in 1944. And when the Russians came in and finally annexed Latvia, they basically had to abandon everything, all their property, and they were able to get onto a German uh, troop ship. And They were allowed to go down into the hold below decks, down in the hold of the ship, which is the very bottom of the ship. And of course, being a German Nazi troop ship, as it were, it was subject to being torpedoed by Allied forces. And being down in the bottom in the hold, survival would have been very unlikely. At any rate, they sailed to Poland in that ship and got off the ship in Poland. I believe, don't have the exact date, but I know it was 1944. And they took a train to Hanover, Germany. And the story goes that my mother had to leave my sister, who was just born in January of 1944, on the train. There were no Pampers back then, but she had a load of diapers and inadequate facilities for that business. But she had to leave my sister on the train and go down to the platform below and carry my grandmother up to the train platform, because my grandmother, pregnant with my uncle, was very bloated, and she couldn't walk very well. She was already in her 40s. And they just made it onto the train before the train took off and started rolling. And safely, hopefully well, of course, they were all together and went to Hanover, Germany. When they got to Hanover, the city was pretty heavily bombed out. And I believe on the street where my mom went to meet some relatives, the only building standing was the building that was left there, and it was not bombed. To go further, they spent 5 years in Hanover, Germany, in a Red Cross displaced persons camp until 1950, when they boarded a steamship, which was an American armed services ship, and they crossed the Atlantic and came into New York City and were processed through Ellis Island, I believe. And I remember my sister saying that my mom was telling her and showing her the Statue of Liberty, saying that this is a country of freedom. Well, my grandmother and her, oh yes, I should say that my uncle was born in Hanover, Germany, in the DP camps. And when they got to America, they went to Long Island, New York. They had a sponsorship there with a very fine woman, Mrs. Eichelberger, in Long Island, New York. And my mom and sister, she divorced her husband at that point. And that's another story. He was actually a Latvian Legion German soldier. And I think that there was something to do with the fact that he was able to negotiate not being shot by the Nazis for desertion. And it's a great story that my mom tells, and I think I've recorded the story. It's excellent. It's excellent. At any rate, they went to Memphis, Tennessee, and my mother got a job at St. Joseph's Children's Hospital. She was educated as a nurse, and she worked there. However, for whatever reason, she contracted tuberculosis. And she spent 5 years in a tuberculosis sanatorium. She had to be quarantined, and that's where she met my dad. And my dad had done one enlistment of service in the military and was out trying to work in the civilian population, and he got a job as an insurance agent. And I think he was trying to sell my mom some life insurance. But he met her when she was ill. Of course, he couldn't go anywhere near her, but he waited the long number of years until she was completely cured. She had to have a section of her lung removed, and she quit smoking when she got tuberculosis, but the doctors assured her that now that she was cured of TB, she could begin smoking again. And she was quite an avid cigarette smoker until the early 80s, when she developed an ulcer and decided that this isn't a good thing at any rate. So she married my dad, and I was their firstborn, and then my brother was born 4 years later. He got stationed at Lakehurst, New Jersey. He was in a blimp squadron, which was an anti-submarine warfare type of operation back then. He was in a squadron called ZP-3, Zulu Papa 3. And after that, he got stationed at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, which at the time was a naval air station, and was on several aircraft carriers, namely the Essex, CVS-9, and the Intrepid. I forget the number of that particular boat. He was in an airborne early warning squadron and used to fly in a flight squadron called VAW-33. And he contracted Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1962 and died about less than 6 months later of Hodgkin's disease. So now my mom's a widow, and she eventually found another suitor, and this man's name was Edward Winslow, descended from the original Edward Winslow. Oh, we're 15 minutes already. Good. So at any rate, Edward was the man who gave her this clock. And I would say it was sometime in the 1960s. And my mother has always faithfully wound the clock. Edward passed away in 1993 of a heart condition, and the clock never stopped running. I'm sure the clock never stopped running. My mother would wind it faithfully every week. And I think that's pretty much the story. Thanks for joining me and sharing this moment with me. I'm going to set this clock, and maybe I'll even check in with you guys later. So thank you. This is Peter Piper, True Light, signing off. God bless, folks.